You may know me as the most photographed woman in the world, a princess defined by glamour, royal protocol, and constant public attention. But beyond the flashbulbs and the fairy tale image, I was searching for a deeper purpose. Not on a throne, but in the forgotten corners of a world scarred by war. This isn't just the story of a royal figurehead. This is my story as a humanitarian, told in my own words. It's an unfiltered account of my journey into the heart of war's aftermath, a journey that changed my life, and I hope built a legacy that could shine brighter than any crown. I once said, anywhere I see suffering, that's where I want to be, doing what I can. And I truly meant it. The numbers I read were staggering. Angola had the highest percentage of amputees in the world. 1 out of every 333 people had lost a limb, most because of landmine explosions. But I soon realized that statistics on a page could never prepare me for the truth. That hadn't prepared me for reality, I admitted, my voice steady but shaken. This wasn't me speaking from a palace. This was me, a woman standing on the edge of a minefield, about to step into the heart of a hidden, brutal war. In January of 1997, just months after my divorce from Prince Charles was finalized, I boarded a plane to Angola. I wasn't traveling with a large royal entourage, just a small, dedicated team. I didn't arrive in a ball gown, but in jeans, a simple jacket, and sneakers. My purpose was clear. And when I arrived in Luanda, I made it known with unwavering resolve. It's an enormous privilege for me to have been invited here to Angola, I told the press, to assist the Red Cross in its campaign to ban, once and for all, anti-personnel landmines. Angola was a nation deeply scarred by more than 2 decades of civil war. A fragile peace had been established, but the conflict left behind a terrible legacy, an estimated 9 to 15 million landmines scattered across fields, roads, and villages. These weren't just relics of a war that had ended. They were what I would call stealthy killers, waiting silently long after the fighting stopped. There couldn't be a more fitting place to start this campaign than Angola, I explained, my voice carrying over the bustle of the airport. This nation has the highest number of amputees per population in the world. I understood the significance of my presence, the power of my image to draw the world's attention. But this was more than just a photo opportunity, it was a mission. It is my sincere hope, I continued, that by working together over the next few days we can bring global attention to this vital issue, one that has been largely neglected until now. My visit was organised with the British Red Cross and the Halo Trust, a charity devoted to the dangerous and painstaking work of clearing landmines. It was with their support that I took a step which sent shockwaves around the world. In Huambo province, a region scarred by some of the most intense fighting, I put on protective body armor and a visor. Then, guided by experts in mine clearance, I walked carefully along a cleared path through an active minefield. The images are unforgettable. A princess, a symbol of privilege, deliberately walking through a landscape meant to maim and kill. Later, I described those 4 days in Angola as very intense. That walk wasn't just a stunt, it was an act of deep empathy. It was my way of trying to understand, even in a small way, the daily fear that ordinary Angolans live with. The experience moved me. It transformed abstract statistics into a horrifying reality. But most of all, it was my connection with the victims that truly defined the trip. At orthopedic workshops organized by the International Committee of the Red Cross, I witnessed firsthand the human cost of these weapons. I didn't just watch from a distance, I connected. I sat beside children who had lost limbs while playing, held their hands and listened to their stories. One of the most powerful moments for me was meeting Sandra, a 13-year-old girl who had lost her leg in the war. That encounter deeply moved me, and my own maternal compassion showed through any formal restraints. I spoke about these children with heartbreaking clarity. These devices injure innocent victims who are simply playing or working in the fields. Some of these people may have played no role at all in the civil conflict. My visit, however, wasn't without controversy. Back in the UK, certain politicians labelled me a loose cannon, accusing me of meddling in complex political issues. When questioned about the political backlash, I responded swiftly and decisively. In a memo I later released, I stated firmly, I saw it simply as a distraction, because I'm not a political figure. I am, and always have been, a humanitarian. My focus was unshakable. My interests were humanitarian. That's what drew me to this human tragedy. This clarity resonated with everyone I met. The British ambassador at the time told me that the Angolan people were delighted by my visit. In a country that often felt forgotten by the rest of the world, my presence was a powerful sign that their suffering had not gone unnoticed. Ralph Legg, a program manager for the Halo Trust, shared that people in Huambo still talk about my visit to this day. He said, for those who were here at that time, it created a strong sense of being acknowledged. Everyone I've spoken to who met Diana on that trip said she was kind, considerate, and genuinely interested in them. As I left Angola, I carried with me a renewed sense of purpose and mission. I wrote a letter to the British Red Cross, sharing my hope If my visit has helped highlight this terrible issue in any way, then my deepest wish has been fulfilled. The trip was truly transformative. I explained, I've had hands-on experiences before, but this trip was different. I had more direct contact with people, and the process was less formal. This is the kind of program I've been searching for. I had found my battlefield, but my weapons were compassion and awareness. I used my voice to speak for those who had been silenced by war. My work serves as a reminder that one person's commitment can spark a global movement. If you believe in the power of humanitarian action and want to hear more stories about people who changed the world, please keep sharing these important stories. I'd also love to know what part of my legacy inspires you the most. Your engagement makes sure these stories live on. Just 7 months later, in August 1997, I began another journey, this time into a war-scarred land. My destination was Bosnia and Herzegovina. The nation was just beginning to recover from the brutal conflict that had torn Yugoslavia apart, leaving behind an estimated 1 million landmines. On this journey with the Landmine Survivors Network, the mission felt even more focused and personal, conducted mostly out of the spotlight, away from a large press entourage. I arrived at Sarajevo Airport on August 8, 1997, dressed simply and intentionally to reflect my purpose. At the airport, Ken Rutherford, co-founder of the network and himself a landmine survivor who had lost both legs, welcomed me. I remember his words. He called my visit a happy occasion for a newly emerging country. For 3 days, I traveled the country's back roads. The journeys were uncomfortable, but I pressed on without complaint. My goal was clear: to meet survivors in their own homes. This wasn't about official tours or polite handshakes. I made it known that I had no interest in meeting politicians. My mission was with the people. Before the trip, I spoke openly about my intentions. I am not a political figure, I stressed. My motives are humanitarian. That's why I felt called to witness this human tragedy. How can countries that make and trade these weapons reconcile that with the devastation they cause? The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to global indifference. My journey led me to the village of Dobrinja, to the Solkanovic family's home. Mohammed Solkanovic had lost both feet after stepping on a landmine just weeks before. The family had no idea who was coming. They were simply told a guest would arrive. I reached their home on Mohammed's 38th birthday. Ken Rutherford and I brought a cake and sang happy birthday to a family that was both shocked and deeply moved. I sat with them, listened, and promised to help Mohammed get new prostheses, a promise I was determined to keep. Mohammed, overwhelmed by emotion, later told me, I have a daughter that I named after her, because they say if you want to remember someone, that's the way to do it. In another village called Klokotnica, I found myself sitting on the floor between 2 young boys, who by all accounts should have been enemies. Malik Bradoric, a 14-year-old Bosnian Muslim, and Zarko Beric, a 12-year-old Serbian Orthodox Christian. Both lost their legs in the war. Until that moment, they had never met. The scene was quiet, yet deeply powerful, a silent rebuke to the ethnic hatred that had driven the conflict. Because, as I knew all too well, a landmine does not discriminate. I remember Malik once said he was expecting a member of the royal family to arrive, someone in a glittering dress with a crown on her head. But instead I showed up in jeans and a white shirt. He told me, you were our light at the end of the tunnel. My presence was meant to bring hope. Together with Jerry White, another co-founder of the Landmine Survivors Network, I would arrive in war-torn villages unannounced. People didn't always recognize me, nor could they imagine I would visit their impoverished community. But being willing to truly listen, again and again, to their stories of tragedy, that was the least I could do. Ken Rutherford described me as being all in arm with survivors. She truly walked her talk. Later, at a cemetery in Sarajevo, I was photographed comforting a grieving mother. Her son, a soldier, had been killed in the war. In that moment, it was pure, unscripted human connection. One mother reaching out to another, connected by the universal language of loss. I chose to spend my time where I felt I was needed most. As I once said, I want to do, not just to be. My work in Angola and Bosnia wasn't just a passing interest. It was the result of a deeply held philosophy that I'd been building for years. In my own words, I revealed a powerful worldview, one centered on the absolute necessity of compassion and direct action. I often shared my guiding principle: nothing brings me more happiness than trying to help the most vulnerable people in society. It's a good and essential part of my life, almost like a kind of destiny. This sense of destiny inspired me to take on issues that others found uncomfortable. Even before my work with landmines, I set out to change the way people viewed HIV and AIDS. In the 1980s, when fear was everywhere, I did something simple but powerful. I shook the hand of an AIDS patient without wearing gloves. That single act challenged the global stigma and proved that compassion is stronger than fear. My reasoning was simple: we all need to show how much we care for each other, and in doing so, care for ourselves. I didn't see suffering as just an abstract problem. It was a personal call to action. For me, taking action meant everything. I believed in getting involved, in being hands-on. I wasn't satisfied with being a distant supporter. I needed to be present. I used to say, I want to walk into a room, whether it's a hospital for the dying or a children's ward, and feel that I am needed. In my heart, I believed the world's greatest problem was a lack of love. I think the biggest disease the world suffers from today is the disease of people feeling unloved. I shared in a candid interview, I know I can give love, whether it's for a minute, half an hour, a day, or even a month, and I'm very happy to do that. I want to do that, but this wasn't just a feeling, it became my mission. The Landmine campaign became the greatest expression of that philosophy. In a powerful speech in June of 1997, I spoke about the scale of the tragedy, for the mine is a stealthy killer. Long after the conflict has ended, its innocent victims continue to die or are wounded, one by one in countries we rarely hear about. The world remains largely unmoved by the deaths of around 800 people every month, many of them women and children. I refuse to sanitize this horror. Often I chose not to describe the graphic details of what I witnessed, but my emotional response was clear. I turned my grief and anger into a strong humanitarian demand, a total international ban. I knew my involvement would be criticized as political, yet I always rejected that label. Repeatedly, I insisted my interests were purely humanitarian. This conviction gave me immense strength. I was already looking ahead, planning my next steps, and talking about taking my campaign to other countries with heavy landmine problems like Vietnam and Cambodia. I was building a global movement, one not just based on policy papers but rooted in human connection. My guiding principle was radical empathy. It meant seeing the world through the eyes of others, a lesson I was determined to share with my sons. As I once said, I want my boys to understand people's emotions, their insecurities, their distress, and their hopes and dreams. That was at the very core of who I am. I wanted to show what it truly means to use a platform of immense privilege, not for personal gain, but in selfless service to others. My greatest hope was that one day the world would unite to sign a treaty banning the anti-personnel mines I fought so hard against. I wished that my visit to Angola would transform how people saw landmines, and in doing so help save countless lives. I often think back to that minefield I walked through in Huambo, Angola. I imagine it now not as a place of death, but as a thriving community. I imagine that street now home to a school, maybe even one named after me. A place where children can learn and play, free from fear. My greatest hope is that Angola will always remember the work we did there. My legacy isn't just in treaties or in clearing minefields. I hope it lives on in the people whose lives I touched, and in a new way of thinking about public service. I hope I showed that one person can face human suffering head-on and call the world's attention to it. I gave up palaces for minefields, traded protocol for compassion, and became what I always hoped to be, a queen in people's hearts. Here's a simple message I've often shared, one that I hope will inspire you today, just as much as it did in the past. Carry out a random act of kindness, expecting nothing in return. Do it with the quiet trust that one day someone might extend the same kindness to you.